Okay, that brings us to unfinished business, and we only have one item of unfinished business. That's remarkable. 2013-2014 budget updates.
Boy, this table's got a squeak in it there. Sure it is squeaky. Well, I spent some time over the last couple of weeks kind of refining the budget, and I'm just going to, go on the record right now that the numbers for 13-14 in the budget, here's revenues, expenditures, are not final, so they can change, and they will change. So I just wanted to go on record with that. But saying that, we're getting it tightened down. We'll have our preliminary budget presentation in May, and then our final recommendation in June, and then you'll approve a budget to take to the annual meeting in July. That's kind of the scenario. Everything that we're doing now is kind of leading up to that preliminary budget that we present in May. So it's probably like 2 steps before the final draft. How's that? Does that kind of set the tone what we're looking at? Now, having said that, there's 2 proposals up here that we're looking at. One is based on the governor's proposal of a $0 increase to public schools. And if we had that $0 increase right now, what it would look like to us today, and again, this number kind of changes based on, what we're looking at in the district, people coming and going and things like that, because we've been committed and always are committed to making reduction and changes, through attrition and other means if we need to do that. And just looking at getting a closer look at some of the non-salary items and starting to put in actual numbers for the salary information. And if we look at that with a $0 increase in 13-14, as we stand today, we're about $200,000. We have a $200,000 deficit. And you really can't talk about 13-14 unless you're having some sort of conversation about 14-15, because I've said to the board and to the different buildings when I've been out talking to them, if this was a 1-year deficit, I wouldn't be too concerned about it, because we've been doing some things over the course of the past couple of years, actually 4 or 5 years, to put ourselves in a position once we run into this issue where we would have these large deficits that we're looking at here. And we could probably absorb that. When you see it on the fund balance, that's one mechanism. That's not what we're recommending, but it has to deduct that on the sheet that I'm using, so it shows a decrease, but we're certainly not recommending a decrease. We need to deal with this $200,000 deficit. And if we do it in a one-time type of fix, let's say if we don't purchase buses next year, because we're a little bit ahead of schedule, and we could potentially not do that. That means we have to purchase buses in 14-15, so we just kind of compound our problems if we do not take action to reduce our costs on an ongoing manner. So you're looking at 14-15 then at a overall deficit of about $1.2 million. Okay, that's if we're getting a $0 decrease. And this is a combination of, I've got a 1% built in the salary increase for both years and 8% built for health insurance. And then also looking at some other cost increases in there, and one of them being open enrollment. Open enrollment is a significant dollar figure for us now, and we're, this year I've built in a $70,000 increase on open enrollment. And with open enrollment, although all the dollars that we get from that does not travel with the student or the child, about $6,500 does travel for it, so it is a reduction or an expense that we have to factor in. The other thing that I would talk about here is we look at our 3-year rolling average. We actually lost about 23 kids, I believe, this year, and if you take 23 kids on that average, take that times the $9,000 per student that we're getting, that equates to, I think, roughly about $230,000. So, we also have a little bit of declining enrollment. Now, we know kind of what's going on with that is a little bit it has to do, or quite a bit of it has to do with Fort McCoy in a transition of a couple units that actually started just a little bit over a year ago, and so the 13-14 school year will be kind of a real telling sign to us of what our enrollment's going to do. We're also getting some additional dollars on a declining enrollment exemption in 13-14, and if our enrollment continues to stabilize, we'll lose that declining enrollment. So you got a lot of things that are rolling up into that $1.2 million in 14-15. And the one thing that we haven't talked about, and we're going to be talking about in the near future too, is what effects is healthcare reform going to have on the Tacoma School District as an employer? What additional costs will that bring? Because we know it's going to cost more. It's not probably going to cost less right now. So that's really the first proposal out there. The second proposal is based on some conversations that are happening really at the Joint Finance Committee level when you start looking at that. And there is some discussion of a $150 increase to schools. But that's got to translate. It's got to move from the Joint Finance Committee to the Assembly and the Senate, and then it's got to get to the governor's desk, and the governor has to approve that. The one thing that I've always said every year when the governor presents a budget, the governor typically gets what the governor wants. So we'll have to see how this ultimately shakes out. But as you can see with the deficits that not only is Tacoma running, but many of the other school districts are running, you can't even keep up with the fixed costs, let alone provide any pay increases, whether it be for health insurance or for salary. So, but if we looked at that $150 increase right now, based on the same numbers, just changing from a zero increase to $150 per student, that would change the Tacoma School District's outlook to about a $60,000 surplus. As I talked to the principals, I said, don't start spending that money, because as easily as I think I can absorb a $200 deficit in the budget, it can also go the other way very quickly too. So this $60,000 surplus could also end up being a $100,000 deficit, depending on how things go, and where our costs go. But really, the real effects of this really come into play in 14-15. And now, instead of having that $1.2 million deficit, now you're looking at about a $427,000 deficit. So as we're looking at the per pupil increase, from a school district perspective and trying to implement the programs that we have, and to, as one of our goals was in the strategic plan, to recruit, retain, and hire quality staff, this is pretty important. You can't maintain this, and who knows what's beyond that. Really, we're kind of in a year-to-year status. The only difference being is this would be the first of a 2-year budget, so I would expect at the annual meeting that we're having some pretty, serious discussions on what's going on in 14-15. Questions?
Under your scenario for the next school year with a 0% increase, you said we could absorb that $200,000 deficit?
Yes.
Would the same be held true on your $150 increase scenario for 14-15? Is that $427,000 deficit, is that something you can absorb or not?
No, there's as we were talking to administrative staff, we have a $30 million budget or more. There's always flexibility in a budget. One of the things I did is I took some flexibility to make, just to get to this number, about $70,000 out of our utility budget that we had for flexibility. Keeping in mind that we've done a lot with energy management over the last 5 years, so I think we're in pretty good shape, and I think we can do that. The flip side of that, if we go back to about 4 or 5 years ago, if we have a winter like we had this winter, and we get the high natural gas prices that we had, that'll change things significantly. So, we're really adjusting budgets to make things work. And one possibility on this $200,000 deficit, to make that work, would be reducing another budget in another area. So you're stealing from Peter to pay Paul. And like I said, 13-14, we're gonna get through it. 14-15, you're going to have a lot colliding here. The one thing that we haven't talked a lot about, because we don't have any information on it, we've looked at the sequester. You know, we're anticipating a 10% reduction in our Title I and our special education dollars, and the two of those probably equate to about $1.5 million.
And those aren't forecasted here.
They're not forecasted in here because 13, 14, I can make them up. I have no idea, you know, what that's going to happen in 14, 15. You have a grant going away in 14, 15 down the Grange Elementary that we're employing. You want to hit that space button there, please? Thank you. Come on now. That we're paying for 3 teaching assistants out there to improve the reading at the Grange Elementary. So, you know, as I'm going out to the buildings and as I'm talking here, I'm feeling pretty good about 13, 14. We can get through it, not without pain though. You know, I mean, that's the thing that we need to emphasize. And when we come back with that budget in May, we will show you the pain. The problem is with that pain is until the board actually has to sit through the pain and really make the tough decision, and until staff and administrators make those tough decisions, the pain is not felt as great. But I can most certainly assure the board that in 14, 15, if this doesn't happen here, and this happens here, and tack on to that healthcare reform and the possible sequester, you know, you could potentially see a $2 million deficit that we need to. And we will not have any tools left in the toolbox, except to further reduce salary and fringe benefits and reduce programming in the district. Those will be the only mechanisms we have left.
And we talked about this at Finance, and that was the point Mr. Gorder made, is last couple of years, whether you want to call them tools or tricks, we've been able to resort to a number of things to really fight our way out of some corners. Employee contributions to retirement, the changes in the health insurance packages for 2 budgets, those got us a long way down the road in 2 tight budgets, but we don't have those kind of things anymore.
And I would look at those tools depending on your point of view, and there's always a point of view is either positive or negative, but they have benefited the district in order to accomplish its budget goals in the last 2 years, regardless of what your opinion is. But they will not be available to us unless you continue to further decrease salary and benefits to staff or start eliminating programs to students.
And I think that is what, you know, that's what we're going to have to start talking about.
Programs.
Right. We've been fortunate to not impact students to a great degree. We've been able to maintain programs, maybe not have the same level of staffing for all those programs, but the programs are there. And, you know, I think as we look to 13, 14, you know, as Mr. Gorder said, we've been committed to attrition. As we've looked at positions, you know, if someone retires, we decide, nope, we're not going to replace that, we're going to make do without it. We may find ourselves in a position where we are laying individuals off, where it's not a matter of attrition, we just cannot afford this position or that position, and unfortunately, individuals may be without a job.
And probably the bigger thing is the effects on what it's going to have on programs offered to kids. Because if you're reducing positions in the district, not only does that have effect on the individual, but it will have an effect on the programs, it will have effect on class sizes in what we're able to offer. You know, I was talking to Cindy the other day, and, you know, kind of feeling good about what we've, under very difficult circumstances, what we've been able to accomplish. And one of them, you know, was talking about the remedial reading positions that we eliminated. And I believe that was probably 7 positions. And, you know, kind of feeling good about that and looking at the test scores and saying, you know, has this really had an impact? And she reminded me, it's too early to tell. So when we've solved some problems, but the effects on what it's having on test scores, which really translates to individual achievement which is why we're here in the end, we have no clues. And I can't imagine what, and I don't even want to say these are worst case scenarios. I feel pretty confident on that $1 million deficit you're looking at in 14-15. And I know healthcare reform will cost more money. We've already started to look at some of those projections. And that has the potential to bump that up significantly to that $2 million mark. But again, all of these are estimates and guesstimates based on what we know, so we have a ways to go to get to what we actually know and where we need to be at. So we'll just have to let things unfold. But right now, this is kind of what we're facing. This is what we're facing.
Well, I appreciate you giving us the honest numbers. There's really no way to preempt the situation. We have to wait and see what the state decides, and then
I think
do the
we
best
can.
can.
I think we have to make an effort to influence what is going to be decided at the state level.
Yes.
And Mr. McMullen, I want to thank you again for traveling down to the Joint Finance Committee to talk to them about how the proposed biennial budget does impact the Toma School District and our concerns with money going for vouchers. I've embedded some articles for you to take a look at as well, and I just did a few additional ones this afternoon that you may not have seen. But there's a lot going on in Madison right now, and one of the concerns that exists right now is the fact that the state report cards, which were just implemented last year for the first time, the purpose of those, really the analogy that's being used, they were developed to be a flashlight to kind of highlight for districts areas where they can improve. And that's really how we looked at them. And as you know, Mr. Hay came forward and said, math is an area we really need to focus on at the high school. We need to make some changes so we can get improvement. Well, what appears to be happening now is that the report cards are starting to be used as a hammer, almost penalizing school districts, because you're seeing in the governor's proposal that money, again, going to voucher schools, claiming that they will do a better job than public schools. That's one argument that's being made, along with the idea that some of the individuals are using those ratings on the report card as an A through an F grade, which they were never designed to be. So I believe Speaker Voss came out at the end of last week saying that 1 in 4 Wisconsin schools was not meeting student needs, that they were failing. That's 25%, and according to the report cards, the statistics for the whole state, that's just not accurate. But he's taking those two lowest areas and saying that's a D or an F grade. So they're kind of, I guess, distorting how that information was collected. And again, we know that those were developed with the idea that it would take a few years to really perfect that report card as well. So there's just a lot going on, and I think, people need to speak up for public education. They need to talk about how $150 is not unreasonable. It certainly will help our district in managing the deficit that we're going to be looking at. And we really need to have conversation about vouchers and money being taken from public schools and being put into private voucher schools. Choice does exist. Folks can pick any school in the state of Wisconsin that they want their child to go to. They can apply for that through open enrollment. But I know in one of the articles I shared with you, I thought this was an interesting quote. They said, the argument posed by some that I pay property taxes, so my taxes should go to the school that I want my child to go to, is faulty. We don't pay taxes to fund our child's education. We pay taxes to fund public education, plain and simple. And again, that's mandated by the state constitution. I think it's important that people remember that. So we need discussions, we need people talking to our legislators, letting them know how they feel about these issues, and hopefully building continued support for the good work that's being done in public education. You saw that tonight at the start of the meeting with an outstanding student presenting and just us talking about the great things that are happening in our district.
Thank you, and I know you've submitted articles to the newspaper, at least telling the public about some of the things that we're facing right now. And, you know, they don't have to agree with all of that, but it was interesting. They took some polls on people about the voucher issue, and what was striking was that a lot of people just didn't understand it. And so, at least before much is done on that, it would seem that the public should know more about at least how that works and how it affects public schools. So thanks for issuing those articles.
Thank you to the Tacoma Journal for printing the school bell. I appreciate that very much also.
I guess we'll be revisiting this at the next meeting again, Mr. Gorder.
And the meeting after that.
And
And the meeting after that.
It's not going
Right through the annual meeting.